Hello and welcome to the Fundraising Summit. I'm Alan Sharp. I'm the chair and the host of the 2015 Fundraising Summit, and I'm pleased to introduce Jerry Smith. Jerry Smith is an author, he's a lecturer, he's a teacher, and a fundraising consultant, and he's also the president and CEO of the J.F. Smith Group, Incorporated. Jerry's mission in life is in fundraising is to enable his clients to fulfill their fundraising dreams through a unique, educational, professionally directed development partnership. And Jerry's method has proven successful in over 23 years in business. Jerry's authored a number of books on fundraising, and you'll hear about one of them during this session. He's also conducted seminars on many topics related to fundraising in the United States, in Europe, and he's conducted seminars for the Association of Fundraising Professionals, the Association of Healthcare Philanthropy, the Council for Advancement and Support of Education, and also the Association of Christian Schools International. Jerry is talking to us today about success in major gift fundraising and how it is spelt with 3 C's. Welcome, Jerry, to the Fundraising Summit. Over to you.
Thank you, Alan. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you and your summit today. You know, when I got to thinking about fundraising, I've been in the business, Alan mentioned 23 years. Actually, I've been in my own business for 24 years, and I've actually been in this business over 30 years. But when you get to thinking about it, you know, really, when you look at fundraising, success is spelled with 3 C's, and those 3 C's are contact, cultivate, and close. It's that simple. So what I want to do today is I want to break out those 3 C's and talk to you about, you know, contact. What's a contact? I want to talk to you about cultivation. How do you cultivate someone? And how do you close? And, you know, when you look at those 3 C's, probably the hardest C to work through and to understand is the last one, and that's close. And we'll talk a little bit about that as we walk through the presentation. First of all, you know, what is a contact? A contact is a meeting of substance. It's a meeting between you and a prospective donor. It's a phone conversation of substance between you and a prospective donor. I've had development officers tell me when we talk to them, and we talk to development officers about contacts, and we like to say that you need to make at least a minimum of 20 contacts per month. But development officers will tell me, hey Jerry, I was at a basketball game or a football game, and I saw my prospect across the way, and I waved at him, and he waved back at me, and I said to that development officer, that's not a contact, that's a sighting. You know, you're seeing it, but you're not making a contact. So it's got to be a meeting of substance between you and a prospective donor. So, you know, when you start thinking about how is a contact pre-qualified? Because you have a list of prospects. If you don't have a list of prospects, of course, you're out of business. But, you know, how do you qualify? How do you pre-qualify a contact? And, you know, there are several ways to do that. One is through electronic screening, prospect inclination ratings, peer reviews. Years ago, when I was at a university as executive director of alumni and development at a major university, we used to do what we call prospect rating, and we would sit around a table with 5 or 6 knowledgeable individuals. We would go through the list of names, and we would say to that group, John and Mary Smith, what are they? What can they give to the campaign? And when we said that, what would they give to the campaign? We get some very low numbers. So I learned real quickly that you don't use that phrase. What you do is you say, what are they capable of giving? And then they would say, well, they're capable of anything. And I would say, well, is that 50,000, 100,000? What's the number? And they would invariably say, well, any of those. So I didn't get a lot of great information. And now over the last several years, you know, we've been doing what we call electronic screening. And then we take it a step further. And let me just show you, we look at this next slide. What we do is we look at we call it wealth screening or electronic screening, and there are a number of companies that will do this. And what they do is they give you, they give you the gift capability of an individual over a 5-year period of time. Now, here's what happened. When I started using electronic screening or wealth screening, and I got numbers back, and let's say, again, I'm talking about John and Mary Smith, and John and Mary Smith were capable of, over a 5-year period of time, of doing $100,000. I used to take that $100,000 from electronic screening, and then I would go and see John and Mary Smith, and I would ask them for $100,000. Well, what was happening was I was getting about 50 cents on the dollar. I was getting about 50% of my ask amount. Now, in our campaigns and in our major gift initiatives and our fundraising efforts, we always measure the dollar response rate. So when you're out there talking to people and you're talking to people that are closely associated with the organization, then your dollar response rate ought to be fairly high. It ought to be 85, 90 cents on the dollar because they're the ones that are involved. They're the ones that are committed to the organization. What I was getting was 50 cents on the dollar, which says if that happens to you, then it indicates that you're asking for too much money. So I'll walk you through what we did. But we took the wealth screening, and then we started doing what we called an RFM analysis, recency, frequency, and monetary. I'm not going to get into a lot of detail on this, but we were able to take those individuals that came off of the electronic screening from top to bottom. Let's say you had 5,000 names. We didn't take the top 250 and say, okay, here, this is your top 250 prospects. We then looked at who are those people based on their recency of a gift, frequency of a gift, and their monetary gifts. I can give you more information later, but that's basically what we did. And then we looked at their inclination rating. How strongly are they inclined to give? What is their relationship to the organization? We would come back with an unverified ask amount, and then after we had it verified with our peers, a committee of peers, then we were able to verify the ask amount. So if you look at the next slide, you look at the pre-qualification is important. So here's what happened. We came back and we had our top 250 people based on our RFM analysis, and then we said, okay, let's measure their inclination of the top 250, and we used a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being low, 5 being high. Now, you can develop your own criteria, but what's a 5? A 5 is someone who's given to your organization 10 out of the last 15 years. They're on a board. 1 is they've given once, or they just about them, you think they have some relationship. So we used the 1 through 5, and then we said, okay, again, going back to John Smith that I mentioned earlier, we said John gave us had an electronic screening number of $100,000, and then he had a 5. He was very closely associated with the organization, and so I said, okay, with a 5, that's 50%. I took 50% of the $100,000, and now my ask amount became a $50,000 ask. So what I was finding now when I go out and make that presentation and ask John and Mary Smith for that amount of money, I was getting an 85 and 90% response rate. So it works. And what I'm saying to you is that you've also, not only are you looking at when to pre-qualify your prospects, you're not looking at necessarily just their ability to give through electronic screening. You've got to take it to another step, and that step is the verification of those individuals. So again, looking at their relationship to the organization, and then getting a group of peers, because now what we do is we take that group, those 6 or 8 people I mentioned earlier, we take those 6 or 8 people and we say John and Mary Smith, $50,000, Tom and Sue Jones, $25,000. We're able to give them numbers, and so that's what we call a verification committee. And they're able to say that, yes, that's a good number, or no, that's too high, or that's too low. So it's a verification. Now, when you look at moving on from pre-qualifying, the purpose of a contact is to meet face-to-face. I said earlier the purpose of contact is to meet face-to-face or have a meeting of substance over the phone, but your best meetings are meeting face-to-face. And what you're going to do is you're going to share information with that prospect. Here's someone you don't know. You've identified that individual as a prospect based on those, what we talked about earlier, the pre-qualification. You're going to share information with them. Now, let me tell you the most important point here, and the purpose of the contact is going from general to specific. Going from general to specific. I was with a development officer last week, and we called on a couple of individuals. And after the meeting, and this was a preliminary, this is the first time we had met this individual. When we got back in the car, I said, there's no structure to your meeting. And so he was going from general to specific to general back to specific, and it wasn't working. And so you've got to go in and talk generally about the organization, the positive things about the organization. You don't sell negative, you sell positive. So you talk about the general things, the positive general things that are happening in your organization, and then you move to the specific. So if you're in a campaign, you're going to say, let me tell you why I'm here specifically is to talk to you about the campaign. We have a working goal of X, and we've raised X number of dollars. Our board is 100%. Our staff is 100%. And so, during that meeting, you're trying to determine their interest and you're trying to determine their inclination to give. So when you look at really a contact, it's something where you're going to find out whether you go to the next step or not. Now, a lot of times you're going to meet with someone and you're going to determine they have no interest and they have no inclination, and so you move on to the next person. So the ones that do have an interest and the ones that do say, yes, I'm interested in what you're talking about, and one of the things I found out, and especially in the contact stage, is that you have to ask a lot of questions. Most development officers don't ask questions. They come into a meeting, sit there, listen to the prospect talk. It's the old 80-20 rule. Listen 80% of the time, talk 20%. They listen to that person talk, and then they make some assumptions. They get back in their car, and they assume they heard whatever. But really and truly, they don't really know unless they ask some specific, direct questions. So I would encourage you to ask questions here at this stage. Now, if they're a prospect, you determine that, then you want to move on to the next step, the next C, and that next C is cultivation. And really cultivation is a sincere desire on your part to build a relationship, thereby building a friendship, thereby building a relationship. Excuse me. Really cultivation is, again, I can't stress the fact that it's got to be sincere. I remember one time when I was at this university I was working with, I had a prospective donor. He invited me to come to his daughter got married in a small church, but he invited me to come to the reception following the wedding. So I came down. I drove 2.5 hours to the reception. Went through the receiving line. I talked to the prospect, his wife. I talked to his daughter and her new husband. I stayed about 15 minutes, got in my car, and drove back home, about another 2.5 hours. Now, if he told me once, he told me 5 times how much that meant to him, that I would do that. And I did it not as a phony. I did it because it was a sincere part on to me to build that friendship, and thereby building a relationship. And I can tell you, later on, he made a substantial 6-figure gift to the university. Now, when you really look at the cultivation, there's really 5 I's of donor cultivation, and you all probably have seen this before. One is identification, information, interest, involvement, investment. So when you look at, you've identified your prospect. We talked about identifying your prospect. So once you've identified them, you've got to provide them with information. You've got to get information about the organization. 3, you've got to determine their interest. What is their interest? And again, you've got to ask some questions to try to determine that interest. And then you've got to get them involved. Here's a basic principle in this business. It says that prospective donors who get involved in organizations tend to become committed to those organizations, and the dollars follow the commitment. So you got to get them involved. It's the same old principle I hear a lot of times where they say to me, Jerry, donors organizations will say, we've got donors that have ability to make a multi-million-dollar gift. Well, let's go over there and get their money. And I always come back to, okay, what's their involvement here? Have they ever been a member of this organization? Have you ever visited with them before? Do you know anything about them? Probably not. All of those are no's. They're not going to give you their money. What you have to do, if you've identified a prospect in your organization that has no involvement with you, doesn't know anything about you, then you've got to get them involved. You've got to determine their interest. You've got to get them involved. And then when you do that, then investment takes place at the top. So let me tell you, when you go back to the next step and you start cultivating, your solicitation rate, success rate, increases with the number of preliminary or cultivation meetings you have prior to making the ask. What do I mean by that? I'm talking about if you identified a John Smith in your organization who you go in and you asked him for or her for a gift of whatever amount the first time you meet them, then the chances of success are not very good. But if you go in and you cultivate that relationship and you have a number of preliminary or cultivation meetings prior to making the ask, your success rate increases dramatically. So, here are the keys to cultivation. One is be willing to build a friendship with your prospect. You're going to build relationships with people, and they're not going to be able to give to you. So that doesn't mean that you see them in the store and you see them in the aisle and you're walking down and you turn around and go the other way because they're not able to give to you. You got to be genuine. You got to be thoughtful. You got to remember significant events in the prospect's life. You've got to do all those things. But let me tell you, one of the last things I have here, the last point about keys of cultivation, and this is something I think you need to look at and determine based on the number of prospects you have in your organization. It's called the Rule of Three. I established this with an organization we work with. We had so many prospects. We had so many names in our database. I told the development officers, and so I've sort of contradicted myself because I said, earlier, I said the more preliminary meetings you have prior to making the ask, the more success you're going to be. But I said, look, we've got so many prospects, we've got to establish a Rule of Three. The Rule of Three is you have to make a solicitation on the third visit. Third visit. Now, what am I saying here? I'm saying you're probably going to leave a little bit of money on the table, but I'm telling you, if you're in a campaign or a major gift initiative, you've got to get that person committed to at some level and move on, and then you can start building that relationship at a later point. Now, remember, cultivation is giving, not taking. It's giving, not taking. You don't take anything from the prospect. I had a development officer tell me he met with a donor who had a box at a major a baseball stadium. Excuse me. And so he came back after that meeting. A few weeks later, he calls that donor and he says, look, I'm going to be in your town, and I noticed you told me in the meeting that you had a suite or a box at the stadium. Do you think I could have a couple of seats in that box? That is you don't do that. You don't take from a prospective donor. You want to give back to that prospective donor based on whatever he or she wants to need from your organization. So remember this: it's not about you; it's about them. It's not about you; it's about them. So when I look at the next stage, and that is the close, and this is the most difficult of the 3 C's. I told you before. I remember meeting with a development officer one time, and she told me, she said, Jerry, I'm the queen of cultivation, but I cannot close. I don't know how to close. Let me tell you what you do. You start closing from the very first meeting you have with that prospect. When you're in that contact stage, you're closing. When you're in the cultivation stage, you're closing. Now when you get to stage 3, where you're officially closing, I want to say to you, there are no shortcuts. It may take a while to close, but you've got to close. That's your objective. Now, when I'm in a meeting or when I'm trying to train development officers, I'm telling them that every meeting has to have an objective. If I'm in the car with you and we're going to see a prospective donor, I would say to you, what's our objective? What's our objective? And here's what I think your objective should be when you're talking to a prospective donor. You're going in to meet with him or her in a cultivation meeting. You're trying to determine the 4 rights. And the 4 rights I remember by using the word TAP, T-A-P-P. When's the right time? What is the right amount? What is the right project? Who is the right person to make the ask? Now, you won't probably determine all 4 of those in one meeting, but you might determine 2 or 3 of them. You come back and you're looking for the remaining objectives of the 4 rights. So again, remember that TAPP, the right time, the right amount, the right project, the right person. So when you look at going out to make a presentation to someone in the close, and here's what I believe, and I believe strongly in this, and that is you always take a written proposal with you. Always take a written proposal with you. You never go out and ask your prospect for a gift without having something in writing to carry with him or her. Now, our proposals are about 10 or 12 pages in length. And if you'd like a copy of one of our proposals, I'd be glad to send it to you. You can certainly email me later. But what we do is we have a cover letter that's signed by in the campaign, that's signed by the chairman of the campaign. We have, in that letter, we're telling that prospect about the project. We also, in the last paragraph, we're asking that prospect, excuse me, We're asking that prospect for a specific dollar amount. And then we've got the second page is an executive summary, which is 1 or 2 pages. It's a little bit more information than the cover letter. Then we have an opportunity sheet. Now, I don't have a need sheet. I don't believe in that word. I don't ever use that word needs. I use the word opportunity. I talk about investing in the future of the organization. And so the opportunity, you talk about why that opportunity exists and why it's necessary. Then I have a budget page. And in the budget page, I'm going to outline the cost of the projects you're trying to fund. Now, let me tell you this. My philosophy is I don't believe in even numbers. I don't want to put a number out there that says we're trying to raise $100,000. I'm going to have a number that's going to be $101,500, whatever that odd number is. Even numbers look like you pulled that number out of the air. Odd numbers, it appears that you have done some study, that you have tried to determine what the actual budget may be. The invitation page is also where we would say to an individual, thank you for your previous gifts. We also ask for the specific dollar amount in the invitation page. But basically the invitation page is to, if there's a naming opportunity, we're going to say in recognition of a gift of this size, we would like to recommend to the board that this area be named in honor of you and your family. So let me just say that and I'll tell you I'll come back to that in a second, but the appendix, I've got pictures of the project, I've got pictures of buildings or whatever it may be, but I'm also going to put in the appendix the board members. And I'm not going to list board members by name only. I'm going to list board members by titles. I think titles give you and the organization credibility. Then I also would put in the appendix a list of the donors, people who have donated to date, so that it's in alphabetical order, no dollar amounts, but people look at that. They want to see who has made a donation to this organization, and so it's important. Now, let me go back to naming opportunities a little bit and give you my philosophy on naming opportunities. I'm not opposed to that at all. That's a board decision to whether you're going to name areas for individuals or not. But I don't like to sell naming opportunities. I don't go in and say to someone, if you'll give us $100,000, we'll name this room after you. I don't do that. I would say to them, based on the projects, I would ask them, and based on the opportunity, I would talk to them about that and ask them for the specific dollar amount. And then I would say, in recognition of a gift this size, we would like to recommend to the board that this area be named in honor of you and your family. So it's a little different than just going out and trying to sell naming opportunities. Okay, now, prior to the close, the close is you're going in to make a solicitation. We're going to look at the 4 rights, determine what the TAPP. We got a written, customized proposal that we're going to bring and take with that person. We're going to confirm the date, time of the meeting. We're going to review the donor's personal information, especially if you're taking the chairman of the board or taking somebody else with you. You want to have all that information, present it to that individual that's going with you to make a presentation so he or she knows a little bit about that individual. Now, I think it's important that when you go out to close, I would have 2 people making solicitations. I just believe 2 are better than 1. 2 is better than 3. Here's my philosophy. Anybody that goes on a solicitation has to have a role. So if you're going to take 3 people with you, all 3 have to have a role. I made a solicitation one time where we asked this gentleman, it was a company, we took 7 people with us. 7 went in to make that solicitation. Every one of us had a role in that presentation. Now, let's do this. I want to review with you my 5 steps in solicitation. So I've been using the 5 steps for the last 15 years, and I found that it works extremely well. And I would say if you don't get anything out of this presentation, take the 5 steps and use the 5 steps, because here's what my philosophy is. I wanted to go, when I went with someone, I went with the chairman of the board, the executive director of the organization. I wanted to make sure that the right hand knew what the left hand was doing. So here's my 5 steps. You're going in and sitting down and talking to this prospect. Now, we've already been in a meeting with that person. We've called them on the phone. We've set up a meeting, and now we're going back to present a proposal to them. So the small talk it's an icebreaker. It's important. It's probably the most important step in the 5 steps. you've got to be able to break the ice. And that small talk doesn't last but 5 minutes, 10 minutes, and it can be whatever you want it to be: the weather, sports, what they thanking them for what they've done in the past. Excuse me. But you want to step number 2 is, by the way, I've got the proposal. If I'm going with you and you're the development officer, this is your role. I've got the proposal in my hand. I'd never take that proposal, that 10 or 12-page proposal that's bound. I've never put that proposal down on a table. I never put it down on a conference table, because if I do, the prospect picks it up. And what does the prospect do? Prospect picks up that proposal, opens it, and begins reading it. And when they start reading it, you lose eye contact. And when you lose eye contact, it's all over. So, you never want to put that proposal down. I always hold on to it. Now, here's what I would say in step number 2. John and Mary, thank you for allowing us to visit with you this afternoon or today about the campaign. So what I have is I have a proposal that I want you to read it, review it, and consider it. I want to leave it with you. So you're basically saying to that prospect, I don't expect a decision today. John and Mary, I have a proposal that I want to leave with you. I want you to read it, review it, and consider it. Now, that takes pressure off of people. The whole 5 steps is built on taking pressure off, not putting pressure on people. Step number 3 is telling the story. And the story is, that's where the chairman of the board, the executive director, they're going to tell the story. What is the story? What are we trying to raise money for? We're going to talk about the opportunities. That's what that person's going to do. If you've got storyboards that you can carry with you, that's important. That makes a big difference. So they're going to talk about the story, and they're going to talk 5 minutes, 10 minutes, no more than 15 minutes. And here's what they have to do. They have to talk with passion and enthusiasm, because it's not what you say, it's how you say it. People don't remember what you say, but they remember your passion. They remember your enthusiasm. Then step number 4 is my role if I'm with you, or your role if you're the development officer. You're going to say, John and Mary, thank you again for allowing us to visit with you. I have a proposal that I want to leave with you. I want you to read it, review it, and consider it. We've just started the campaign. We've raised X number of dollars. The board's 100%. The staff is 100%. What I'd like for you and your family to consider is a gift of $25,000, payable equal amounts of $5,000 per year over the next 5 years in support of the campaign. Now, this is where you stop. This is, my friends, what they call the silent phase in the campaign, or in the ask. You're waiting for that answer. Most development officers will not wait. Here's what most development officers will do. John and Mary would like you to consider a gift of $25,000, payable equal amounts of $5,000 per year over the next 5 years in support of the campaign. But if you can't do that, maybe you could do $20,000. But whatever you want to do is certainly going to be appreciated. They never stop. You've got to stop. Let me repeat that again. You have to stop. John and Mary would like you to consider a gift of $25,000, payable in equal amounts of $5,000 per year over the next 5 years in support of the campaign. Now, what do you think the answer is? What do you think the answer is going to be from the prospect? 99.9% of the time, what are they going to tell you? They're going to tell you, we'll consider it, we'll think about it, whatever they say. Whatever they say, I come back with, John and Mary, thank you. Remember this, any amount you give is certainly going to be appreciated. I think that, again, takes a little pressure off of individuals. So you've got to wait for an answer, but I'm going to tell you this, you've got to ask for a specific dollar amount. That's the greatest mistake made in fundraising today, is not asking for a specific dollar amount. The follow-up, that's your role. That's your role as a development officer. You say to John and Mary, can I follow up with you in a week to 10 days? 99.99% of the time, they will say yes. So those are the 5 steps that you want to follow. And I can tell you that it works, and it works extremely well if you follow that. So, and I'll tell you this too. The person who makes the ask is the person who needs to do the follow-up. So if you're making the ask, you do the follow-up. What I found is that the executive director or the board chairman, if they make the ask, they typically don't follow up. It falls back on you anyway. So the person who makes the ask should be doing the follow-up. Now, let's get to the follow-up. And, here's what I do in the follow-up. I would say to John and Mary, I would call them on the phone. I typically do follow-ups, on the phone. And I would say, John, Mary, this is Jerry Smith. I wanted to follow up on the proposal that we made with you a couple of weeks ago. I wanted to see if you had any questions, comments, or concerns. And what I'll find most of the time is people say, no, we really haven't read the proposal yet. We're still considering it. Then I would say, can I ask permission to follow up again? Can I ask permission to follow up with you in a week to 10 days again? And most people will give me that, will say yes. Now, here's what I found. If I follow up 5 times and I have not gotten a response, then I'm going to say it really, excuse me, what it really means is that I've asked for too much money. And so after 5 follow-up calls, I try to close. In other words, I try to say to that individual, John and Mary, we really want you to participate in this campaign, and we asked you for $25,000. Would you consider $12,500? I really just sort of cut it in half, and they say, excuse me, they say no, we can't do that. Then I would say, can we? Would you consider $5,000? Whatever amount it may be. I'm trying to close. That's what you're trying to do. Excuse me. Now, if they say, we've thought about this, and you asked us 25, but we've been thinking more about 15. Then I would say, then do you feel comfortable signing a pledge card for that amount today? I do that in the meeting. If I'm in the meeting where we're in the meeting and we're making a solicitation, and they say, we asked for 25. See, most people won't necessarily say, yes, we'll do that. Most people will give you some kind of indication. They will say, yes, we will. We've been thinking about 15. We hadn't really thought about 25. Then my response back to them is, do you feel comfortable in signing a pledge card for that amount today? Let me tell you a story real quick. I was with a prospective, with a client, and we went in to see this individual who was, we had asked him to co-chair the campaign. Now, remember the 5 I's? We got him involved. He had really not indicated a very high dollar response from the feasibility study. As a matter of fact, it was a very low dollar response. So, but we looked at his potential. We looked at his electronic screening. We measured all that, and his number came back at, we said we were going to ask him for $250,000. So we got in the meeting. We asked him for the $250,000. We followed the 5 steps. We asked him for the $250,000. He said to us, I'm going to do that. I will do the $250,000. And then he hesitated, and he said, I'm actually going to do more than that. So I said, how much more are you thinking about? And he said, well, I'm thinking $1 million. My next statement to him was, do you feel comfortable in signing a pledge card for that amount today? And he laughed, and he said, yes. I pulled out the pledge card. I always carry a pledge card with me everywhere I go, and you should do the same thing. I pulled out the pledge card. I gave him the pledge card. He signed it. We closed a $1 million gift that day. Most development officers don't know how to close because they're looking for that affirmative, yes, I'll do what you asked me to do. Most people don't tell you that. And so if they give you any indication, you have to ask that. Now, back to the follow-up on the phone where someone says to you, yes, I'm thinking 15 and not 25. Then what I do, and this is a little unusual. A lot of people don't do this. What I will do is say, can I record that decision on a pledge card? And so I have the pledge card in front of me. I'm talking on the phone. I have a pledge card in front of me. I say, can I fill this out for you on the phone? And so where it has a signature, I'll put per phone conversation with Jerry Smith on such a date. Now, when I send him a thank you letter, I'm going to verify in the follow-up letter, I'm going to say, John and Mary, thank you for your pledge of $15,000, which you made over the phone to Jerry Smith on such and such a date. If this is not correct, please let me know. So, again, I like to close. Here's what happens. When you get into a meeting or get on a phone conversation and they say, yeah, we got the pledge card, and we're going to fill out that pledge card, and we're going to send it in to you. You know, if you heard that old saying, the check's in the mail, same principle here. Pledge card is probably not in the mail, probably not going to get in the mail. And so what am I trying to do? I'm trying to close. I'm trying to close right now. Let me tell you this story, too. I was in a seminar listening to a lady speak, and she's written several books. Excuse me. She said, if I ask somebody for $100,000 and they say, I can't do $100,000, but I think I can do 50. She says, well, look, I'm going to call you next week. I want you to think about this some more. I'm going to call you next week, and I want to see if you will do the 100,000, not the 50, but do the 100,000. See, my philosophy is, my mother taught me a long time ago, a bird in the hand's worth two in the bush. So if somebody says to me, I can't do the 100, but I can do the 50, I'm going to pull out a pledge card, and I'm going to get that pledge card signed. I'm going to close that day, and I'm going to move on to my next prospect, whoever that next prospect may be. So here's what happens, though, when you're trying to close, and you're on the phone, and someone gives you a no response. Or they may not give you a no response. People typically don't do that. They don't say no. They just say, well, we're thinking about it. We're not sure what we can do at this point. Here's what I call the iPad, and this was developed by Jerry Panis, and I think Jerry Panis is the guru in this business. But here's what Panis says. You say to that individual, John and Mary, can I ask you a question? You don't say, John and Mary, can I ask you 4 questions? You say, John and Mary, can I ask you a question? Is it about the organization? Is it about the institution? Is that the reason you're saying no? No. Is it about the project? Is that not the right project we presented to you? Do you not have an interest in that project? What about the amount? Is the amount, is that too much? Or is it the timing? Now, Jerry Panis talks about this in one of his books, and he says, I asked these 4 questions, and I got to the end where we'd asked this gentleman for $100,000, and he says to us, I can't do that. And he asked the 4 questions, got the timing, and I said, yes, it's timing. He said, I have two pledges that won't be paid up for 18 months. And so Jerry Panis says, Jerry Panis says, you can sign a pledge card that your pledge will start in the 19th month following the completion of those 2 other pledges. And he said, I didn't know I could do that. I said, yeah, you can do that. So the guy signed a pledge card for that amount that day. Again, you've got to ask questions, and you've got to be prepared to close at any particular point. Let me tell you another quick story, and I talked about the proposal that we take with us. I remember going in to see a grandparent. We were working with a private school. We went in to see a grandparent, and we had a proposal for $35,000. That was the dollar amount. So we went in to sit down and visit with this grandparent. We sat around a table in his office, and he said, I want you to open it. There was an envelope sitting on the table. And he said, I want you to open this envelope first before we start. The president of the school and myself were together. So the president of the school opened the envelope, and there was a check for $25,000 and a pledge for $250,000. Now, what do you think I did with my proposal? I took it with me. I didn't give my proposal out. So, again, there's some common sense approach to all this. I'll tell you another story, too, about trying to close, and that is I went in to see a couple one time, and in the proposal, we were asking this couple for $50,000. So we walk in, and I'm with the chairman of the campaign. We sit down, and so before we get really into the small talk, the gentleman said, well, we know why you're here, and my wife and I have talked about it, and we've decided we're going to give you $500. Well, the chairman of the campaign didn't really know what to say. He just said, well, he sort of stuttered around, well, thank you. We appreciate that. And I said, yes, we do appreciate that. However, that's not the dollar amount that I have in this proposal. Remember, I'm holding on to my proposal. I've got it in my hands. I said, that's not the dollar amount we have in the proposal. She said, well, what is the dollar amount? And so I started with step number 2, where I'm talking about why we're here, and I went all the way through the remaining 4 steps. And I asked for $50,000, and this time it was a 3-year pledge period. I said, we'd like you to consider a gift of $50,000, that'll equal amounts of about $16,000 plus per year over the next 3 years in support of the campaign. And he said, oh, if it's over 3 years, we might be able to do that. Well, they didn't do $50,000, but they did $15,000. So that's a long way from $500. Again, you've got to be prepared when you go in to talk to people. You got to be prepared to close and to respond to whatever they throw at you at that particular point. And I think most development officers don't know how to do that. I remember going in to see a gentleman one time that indicated to us in the feasibility study that he would give he would match whatever the chairman of the campaign gave. And so we waited because this person was a philanthropist. This person was well known in the community. This person could do anything he wanted to do. And so we waited until we had about half of our constituency solicited. We had about half of our goal in hand, pledged, and then we went to see him. So most people had been to see this gentleman first. They went to see him to get this lead gift. We didn't do that. So I walked in, and the secretary told us, the president of the school and I were together, and the secretary told us you have 15 minutes. 15 minutes. Well, again, we have my 5 steps, but we weren't able to get into my 5 steps because he took control of the conversation immediately and started asking a lot of questions. But when he took a breath, then I said, we'd like to ask you to consider a gift of $500,000, $250,000 outright, and $250,000 in your estate plans. I said that real quick. Yeah, his response back to me was, do you have a pledge card? When he said that, I'm standing up, and I'm pulling my pledge card out, and I'm walking around the desk, and I'm putting it in front of him, and he signs the pledge card. So we walk out of there in 15 minutes with a $500,000 pledge, $250,000 outright, $250,000 in estate plans. He never brought up what did the chairman of the campaign pledge. He never brought that up. So again, you're going to come into a lot of situations when you're out there talking to people. But I think if you learn the 3 C's, if you learn how to contact people, and again, go from general to specific in that contact phase. Don't tell people the negative things. I remember going with the dean of the College of Business at a university I worked with. He would go out and tell people, all the negative things. We don't have any chalk. We don't have whatever. I said, George, don't talk about the negatives. Aren't there some great things going on here in the College of Business? He said, yes. I said, tell those things. Don't talk the negatives. Talk the positives. And so he did. So, again, talk about positives. Go from general to specific. When you cultivate people, the second C is you have to cultivate those relationships. But the key point there is you have to be sincere. Not everyone you cultivate a relationship is going to make a leadership gift or maybe even make a gift at all. I know some of the best friends I had when I was at the university were not major donors. But, again, I built that relationship with them, and I built a friendship with them, and it wasn't phony. It was sincere. And they're friends with mine. I'm friends with them today. And so then when you close, remember, you're always closing. You're trying to close from the first time you meet someone, and then the close is you've got to ask for that gift. You've got to ask for that specific dollar amount, and you've got to put that proposal in front of them. And so that's how you become successful and you become a better fundraiser is when you start talking about using the 3 C's.
Jerry, thank you very much. I gather you've written a book along the same topic. Could you tell us a little bit about that and how people can get hold of it?
I have, Alan. And, again, what I would say is that if anyone wants a free copy of my book, Success is spelled with 3 C's, just email me or Donald Harper, and we'll be glad to send you a copy of that book. And as I mentioned in my presentation, if you'd like a copy of our proposal that we use, a generic copy of the proposal, we'd be happy to send you that. We have no, we're glad to share any information we have that might help you in your business of fundraising. So good luck to you, and thank you for listening to this seminar.
Thank you very much.